While Metallica and Iron Maiden dominated the 80s scene, countless killer bands slipped through the cracks. These 30 heavy metal underdogs deserve the recognition they missed. Let's dive in. Steve Grimmett wasn't just a vocalist, he was a force. With a shock of white blonde hair and a voice that could shatter walls, he gave Grim Reaper their identity. His soaring highs and theatrical delivery turned even the cheesiest lyrics into power metal gold. Grim Reaper became infamous thanks to their over-the-top music videos. See You in Hell, 1983, looked like it cost $10 in a fog machine, but fans loved it. It ran non-stop on MTV's Headbangers Ball. Instantly recognizable for its campy horror aesthetic, but behind the cult fame was a real band with real chops. Albums like Fear No Evil in 1985 and Rock You to Hell in 1987 delivered riff-heavy melodic metal that still hits hard today. Legal battles with their label killed their momentum, but Grimmett never gave up. Even after losing a leg, he kept performing until his death in 2022. A true warrior. Let's continue with Witchfynde. Not to be confused with Witchfinder General. Both emerged from the early 80s British metal surge, but their sounds were different. While Witchfinder General leaned into doom, Witchfynde embraced theatrical, occult-infused heavy metal. Their 1980 debut, Give 'Em Hell, featured tracks like Ready to Roll. And the eerie title song. Blending melodic guitars with dark atmosphere. Witchfynde was one of the first bands to weave mystical imagery into metal, an approach that predated and influenced the visual style of black metal. Though they never achieved the cult status of their doomier counterparts, they gained a loyal underground following during the new wave of British heavy metal. With haunting tones and a distinctive aesthetic, Witchfynde left a unique mark on early British metal that still resonates with fans of the genre. No polish, no mercy. Just pure Canadian violence on tape. Razor didn't want to be your friend. They wanted to cave your skull in with a guitar. When Evil Invaders dropped in 1985, it didn't ask for your attention. It took it by force. The title track alone feels like a hockey fight set to thrash riffs. And Stace, Sheepdog McLaren's vocals, spit-flecked howling fury. Dave Carlo's guitar work was relentless, and in true warrior fashion, he kept shredding years later, even after cancer surgery, and losing part of his finger. That's not just dedication, that's feral obsession. Malicious intent and violent restitution kept the aggression cranked, never caving to trends or compromise. While the US and Germany got most of the credit for speed and thrash, Razor was up north, grinding it out, turning basements into battlegrounds. Ask any real thrash fan, Razor weren't just fast, they were lethal. In 1986, Ruler of the Wasteland landed like a thunderbolt, an album that screamed power, precision, and passion. At its core were two unstoppable forces, David T. Chastain, whose guitar playing fused classical flair with raw metal energy, and Leather Leone, a vocalist who didn't just front the band, she commanded it. Leather's voice was fierce, wide-ranging, and full of grit. Less about polish, more about power. She brought authority to every line, giving songs like Angel of Mercy and The King Has the Power an almost mythic weight. Chastain, meanwhile, shredded like a mad alchemist, turning scales into spells. The band never played by the rules. They weren't flashy enough for glam, not chaotic enough for thrash, but that's what made them special. They carved their own path, defiantly and brilliantly. Years later, when Leather returned to the mic, it wasn't just nostalgia, it was a reckoning. Chastain wasn't a footnote in metal history. They were a storm you couldn't contain. Yes, I know you know who Anvil are now, but for decades, these Canadian metal pioneers were little more than a footnote, despite helping to write the book on heavy metal. That was the whole point of Sasha Gervasi's iconic 2008 documentary Anvil. The story of Anvil, to remind us how criminally overlooked they've been. Even though they influenced giants like Lars Ulrich, Slash, and Tom Araya, Anvil's name rarely gets mentioned alongside the legends. Their debut, Hard and Heavy, dropped in 1981, with tracks like At the Apartment, oozing the kind of groove that would later help Judas Priest conquer America. By 1984, Anvil had earned enough respect to share stages at Japan's Super Rock Festival with Whitesnake, Bon Jovi, and the Scorpions. Their 1987 album Strength of Steel cracked the Billboard 200, but just barely, peaking at number 191. Then the 90s hit, metal changed, and Anvil got lost in the shuffle. Still, they never stopped. Today, they remain the ultimate metal underdog story. Decades of struggle, no surrender, and a catalog that still rips harder than most. I want this channel to be a catalog of 80s rock bands, and you can help me grow by subscribing. Cloven Hoof weren't just a band, they were a mythology. Each member took on a character. Earth, water, fire, and air. It sounds over the top now, but in the early 80s, this kind of theatrical madness was exactly what set them apart. Their 1984 self-titled debut didn't just play, it conjured. Tracks like Gates of Gehenna and Return of the Passover weren't songs. They were spells forged in molten steel and Dungeons & Dragons lore. Hailing from Wolverhampton, they rode alongside the WOBHM movement, but leaned harder into fantasy, melody, and high drama. Vocalist Russ North later elevated their sound in A Sultan's Ransom in 1989, a cult masterpiece full of Iron Maiden-esque flair with a darker, more occult edge. They never broke out commercially, but that almost adds to the legend. Cloven Hoof didn't just play for crowds, they played for believers. The ones who knew the real magic was hidden underground. Let's move on to France, where H-Bomb came out swinging with a style that was fast, gritty, and unapologetically heavy. Formed in 1982 by ex-Trust drummer Gerard Michel and vocalist Didier Delceau, they quickly made waves with their debut album Attack in 1984. Songs like Double Bang and Coup de Metal were all-out assaults, tight riffing, machine gun drumming, and vocals delivered in French, which gave them a raw, distinctive character. H-Bomb didn't care about appealing to the English-speaking market. They stuck to their roots, and that earned them serious respect in the European underground. Their sound was somewhere between early Accept and Motorhead, with a punk-alike energy driving the aggression. Unfortunately, the band split shortly after Attack due to creative differences, but their one-album legacy remains a high point in French heavy metal history. Agent Steel hit like a panic attack set to thrash metal. Formed in Los Angeles in 1984, they were faster than their peers, tighter than most, and absolutely obsessed with Cold War paranoia and conspiracy theories. While other bands sang about hellfire, Agent Steel warned you about the CIA hidden agendas and the shadow governments, and they did it at 200 beats per minute. Frontman John Sirius had a shrieking vocal range that split opinions but left no one indifferent. Tracks like Agents of Steel and The Day at Guyana weren't just fast. They were frenzied, like someone trying to warn the world before it was too late. Their albums Skeptic's Apocalypse and Unstoppable Force remain cult essentials in the speed metal world. Internal chaos, label issues, and Sirius's unpredictability derailed their rise. But for the faithful, Agent Steel was raw nerve and urgency. Metal that didn't party, it sounded the alarm. Tokyo Blade always felt like a band on the brink. They had everything. The look, the riffs, the energy. In 1984, they were supporting Dio and Ozzy, sharing stages with metal royalty, and then it all started to unravel. In the same year, right before releasing what should have been their breakout album, Night of the Blade, original singer Alan Marsh was suddenly replaced. His vocals were already recorded, but the label insisted on redoing everything with newcomer Vicky James Wright. The last-minute shakeup derailed the buzz, and they lost precious momentum. Meanwhile, the NWOBHM scene was flooding with new bands. Tokyo Blade got swept aside, not for lack of talent, but because they couldn't catch a break. Too many lineup changes, too little stability. But listen to songs like Lightning Strikes or Night of the Blade, and you'll hear a band that should have been massive. They weren't missing the sound. They were just missing their moment. There was nothing subtle about Raven. They played like their amps were about to blow and the stage might collapse every night. Born in Newcastle in 1974, these guys were pure fire. Long before thrash had a name, Raven were laying the groundwork with chaotic energy and a no safety net live show that left jaws on the floor. Their early records, Rock Until You Drop In 1981 and Wiped Out in 1982, are non-stop blitzes of riffs and shrieking vocals. It wasn't just speed for speed's sake, it was fun, reckless, alive. Metallica and Anthrax opened for them. That's how deep their roots go. In 1984, they signed on for a U.S. arena tour with Ozzy and Whitesnake. Huge exposure, wrong crowd. Beer cups flew. They played faster, louder, refused to bend. Decades later, they're still grinding. New albums, global tours, no compromise. Raven never mellowed out. They just kept hammering away, one sweat-drenched gig at a time. Acid formed in Bruges in 1980 and became one of the earliest speed metal bands out of Europe. Their self-titled debut album was released in 1983 on the Belgian label Roadrunner Records. Fronted by Kate de Lombard, one of the few female vocalists in the genre at the time, their sound was fast, aggressive, and unpolished in a way that felt authentic. Standout tracks like Hooked on Metal, and Ghost Riders showcase tight riffing, pounding drums, and a gritty vocal delivery that stood out in a male-dominated scene. Acid stayed close to the underground, never chasing commercial success, which may be why they remain a cult name today. For fans of early speed metal with a raw European edge, Acid's debut still holds up as an important document of the era. While Acid was stirring up speed metal in Belgium across the Atlantic, the Rods were holding it down with blue-collar American grit. Formed in upstate New York, this power trio didn't overthink it. They just plugged in and played loud. Their self-titled debut album in 1981 came out swinging with tracks like Crank It Up and Power Lover. Both unapologetically heavy and straight to the point. Guitarist and vocalist David Rock Feinstein, cousin of Ronnie James Dio, brought a no-frills attitude that set them apart from more theatrical acts of the time. The Rods weren't trying to be pretty. They were about heart, volume, and sweat. They opened for big names like Iron Maiden and Ozzy, but never quite hit the same level of fame. Still, they earned their respect the hard way, on stage, night after night. Sortilège felt like a secret, one of those bands you almost didn't believe existed until you heard them. And then you were hooked. Formed in Paris in 1981, they played with the fire of Maiden and the soul of Dio, but they sang entirely in French, and that, as magical as it was, also held them back. Their 1984 album Metamorphose is an absolute masterpiece. Soaring, operatic vocals from Christian Augustin, razor-sharp solos from Stéphane Dumont, and melodies so good they hurt. Tracks like Délire d'un Fou and Majesté are the kind of songs that make you close your eyes and fist pump at the same time. It's pure, unfiltered European metal, but the language barrier and lack of international label push kept them in the shadows. English versions of their songs were recorded, but they lost their magic in translation. Still, ask any diehard collector or Euro metal fan, and they'll tell you, Sortilège weren't just good, they were sacred. Before anyone heard a note of their music, Witchfinder General had already stirred up controversy. Their album covers, nude women sprawled across gravestones, mock satanic rituals in churchyards, got them banned from major UK record shops. It was shocking, yes, but also classic doom theater. Formed in the early 80s in Stourbridge, they were part of the NWOBHM wave, but their sound was something slower, darker, and heavier. Sabbath worship, pure and simple, but done with a raw, gritty charm that felt underground in all the right ways. Tracks like Burning a Sinner and Invisible Hate ooze early doom. They only released 2 albums, Death Penalty in 1982 and Friends of Hell in 1983, then vanished. No radio play, no arena tours, but their cult status only grew. For Doom fans, Witchfinder General wasn't just a band, it was a blueprint. Witchfynde left a unique mark on early British metal that still resonates with fans of the genre. Now let's head north to Sweden, where Heavy Load laid the foundation for what would later become Viking metal. Formed in Stockholm, they're often credited as Sweden's first true heavy metal band. Their 1982 album Death or Glory delivered standouts like Heavy Metal Heaven, and The Guitar Is My Sword. Combining classic metal with mythological themes and Nordic pride. Led by brothers, and don't mind my pronunciation, Ragna and Styrbjörn Wahlquist, the band crafted epic stories through music, never cheesy, always powerful. Heavy metal is our life. Heavy metal legends. Their sound was bold but sincere, and it struck a chord with European metal fans. While they never broke through internationally, they built a strong underground following. Today, collectors and early metal diehards see Heavy Load as essential, a pioneering force that gave Swedish heavy metal its first real identity. We stay in Sweden but head further north for one of the country's most obscure cult acts, Gotham City. While Heavy Load leaned into Viking themes, Gotham City had a colder, more melodic approach, almost proto-power metal. Their 1983 EP Black Ritz and the album The Unknown featured standout tracks like Swords and Chains we are riding on in the storm. You can see the swords and chains and Battle Blade. With sharp riffs and soaring, eerie vocals by Björn Munte. Unlike many bands at the time, they kept a low profile, avoiding media and letting the music do the talking. They didn't tour much, and their records had limited pressings, which only added to their underground appeal. With limited releases and little promotion, their records became collector gold. Gotham City may not be widely known, but they're a buried treasure in Sweden's early metal history. Exciter was already lighting fuses before thrash broke into the mainstream. Formed in Ottawa in 1978, this Canadian power trio unleashed Heavy Metal Maniac in 1983, a record so fast and raw it practically exploded out of the speakers. It wasn't just loud, it was feral. Dan Beeler pulled double duty as drummer and vocalist, shrieking behind the kit like he was racing death itself. Tracks like Stand Up and Fight and Iron Dogs defined early speed metal. No frills, no mercy. They followed up with Violence and Force and Long Live the Loud, proving they weren't a fluke. They were a force. While Metallica and Slayer soared, Exciter stayed underground, never chasing fame but always delivering the goods. Their sound influenced a generation of speed and thrash bands, even if they rarely got credit. But in dingy clubs and die-hard collections, Heavy Metal Maniac still reigns, and it still rips. Manilla Road wasn't built for the mainstream. They were built for legends. Formed in Wichita, Kansas in the late 70s, they toiled in obscurity while crafting a sound entirely their own. Their 1983 album Crystal Logic is now revered by collectors and cult fans alike. Raw production, galloping riffs, and Mark the Shark, Shelton's unmistakable nasal snarl, weaving tales of sorcery, battle, and ancient ruins. Tracks like Necropolis and The Riddle Master sounded like a Conan comic brought to life with a Marshall stack. It wasn't polished, but that was the charm. You felt like you'd unearthed a lost relic every time you dropped the needle. They toured minimally, never chased trends and barely registered in the mainstream, but in Europe and the tape trading underground, they were legends. Shelton kept it going until his death in 2018, on stage no less. That's how deep this ran. Manilla Road wasn't a phase, it was a calling. Let's be honest. Cirith Ungol were just too strange for the 1980s, but that's exactly why they're so unforgettable now. This wasn't just a band, it was a full-blown fantasy novel brought to life. Riffs forged in lava, vocals that sounded like a wizard screaming from a mountaintop, and album art that looked like it belonged on a Dungeons & Dragons cover. When Frost and Fire hit in 1981, most listeners didn't know what to make of it. Tim Baker's high-pitched, agonized howls were light years away from all the macho growls dominating the scene. But for those of us who got it, it was pure magic. And King of the Dead, that's doom metal scripture, they vanished in 1992, misunderstood and overlooked. But the underground never forgot. When they returned in 2016, it felt like an ancient prophecy fulfilled. Cirith Ungol didn't follow trends. They carved out their own weird, wondrous world, and decades later, it still gives us chills. Jag Panzer never wanted to be trendy. They wanted to be great. Formed in Colorado Springs in 1981, they were among the first US bands to embrace the power metal blueprint. Soaring vocals, razor-sharp riffs, and lyrics that felt like battle cries. Their 1984 debut, Ample Destruction, didn't just make noise, it made statements. Songs like License to Kill and Generally Hostile were filled with aggression, melody, and ambition. The voice behind it all? Harry the Tyrant Conklin, one of the most underrated vocalists in metal history. His range, power, and theatrical delivery made every song feel epic. Guitarist Mark Bridie held down the band's core, keeping the ship steady through lineup changes and shifting metal trends. They didn't chase radio, and they didn't get flashy. They built a legacy the hard way. Album by album, show by show. For power metal diehards, Jag Panzer isn't a hidden gem, they're a sacred name. Now, in a scene dominated by testosterone and aggression, Holy Moses kicked down the door, and Sabina Classen led the charge like a metal Valkyrie. Long before it was common to see a woman fronting a thrash band, Sabina was on stage in leather, screaming her lungs out and owning every inch of that spotlight. She didn't just belong, she ruled. Formed in Aachen, West Germany, Holy Moses blended razor-sharp riffs with a no-compromise attitude. Their 1987 album Finished with the Dogs didn't just bark, it bit. The speed, the rawness, the chaos, it all felt so real, so alive. And Sabina? Her guttural, snarling delivery put her in league with the best of the era. Holy Moses never cracked the US market like Creator or Sodom, but to thrash purists, they were something special. Sabina wasn't a gimmick, she was a pioneer, and decades later, she's still flying that thrash flag high. If that's not legendary, what is? Now we head back to Belgium for Ostrogoth, a band that brought melody, power, and just enough theatrics to make things exciting. Formed in the early 80s, they made a real impression with their 1984 album, Ecstasy and Danger. Tracks like Queen of Desire and Scream Out showed off their mix of classic metal riffing, twin guitars, and soaring vocals from Mark Red Star de Brouwer. They weren't speed metal like Acid. Instead, their sound leaned towards Judas Priest with a European twist. Their stage shows included leather, studs, and a little flair, but the music always came first. Ostrogoth had a solid following in continental Europe and even supported bands like Manowar and Def Leppard. Internal tensions and lineup changes stalled their momentum, but their early records remain prized by fans of melodic Euro metal. If you were digging into the heavier side of metal in the 80s, Metal Church was that band you proudly told your friends about if they could handle it. Hailing from the Pacific Northwest, they dropped their self-titled debut in 1984, and it was an absolute beast. Gritty, technical, and emotionally charged. Beyond the Black and Gods of Wrath still send chills down your spine.
To stop the master plan.
They had the thrash energy of Metallica, but with more melodic touches and serious songwriting chops. David Wayne's vocals, intense and unrelenting, like a sermon from a doomsday preacher. Their second album, The Dark, kept the fire burning with tracks like Watch the Children Pray. Their history is marked by loss. David Wayne died in 2005, and Mike Howe's 2021 suicide hit hard. Through lineup shifts and heartbreak, Metal Church kept going. For fans, that persistence made them more than a band. It made them immortal. If Motorhead had a wilder, drunker younger brother, it would have been Tank. Born out of the NWO-BHM movement in 1980 and fronted by Al G. Ward, fresh off his stint with The Damned, Tank brought punk attitude and metal power into one explosive package. Their debut album, Filth Hounds of Hades in 1982, is a cult classic. Raw, snarling, and loud as hell. Songs like Shell Shock and He Fell in Love with a Stormtrooper weren't polished. They were real. You could smell the sweat and beer coming off the riffs. Tank never aimed for the charts. They were here to make noise, tear it up live, and leave a crater behind. The band's lineup changed constantly, and they were often overshadowed by flashier NWO-BHM acts, but their spirit never faded. Al G. Ward kept the flame alive until his death in 2023. If you like your metal fast, filthy, and full of heart, Tank never disappoints. Most metalheads heard Blitzkrieg before they knew Blitzkrieg, thanks to Metallica. When James Hetfield and crew covered Blitzkrieg on Garage Inc., it was a blazing tribute to the British band that helped shape early thrash. But who were these guys? Formed in Leicester in 1980, Blitzkrieg were part of the first wave of NWO-BHM. They weren't flashy. They didn't have a gimmick, but they had the sound. Raw, fast, melodic metal with grit and conviction. Their 1985 debut, A Time of Changes, features the original Blitzkrieg, as well as the crushing Armageddon and Hell to Pay. Despite their influence, they never got the push they needed. The production was rough, the label small, and their name faded as metal grew more commercial. But to collectors and diehards, Blitzkrieg represents something pure. An unfiltered, working-class metal spirit that still burns. They never hit the big time, but they helped build the big time. From the first scream of Hall of the Mountain King, you knew Savatage wasn't playing games. They didn't just perform, they unleashed. Hailing from Florida, the Oliva brothers turned metal into theater, fusing crushing riffs with piano lines and grandiose ambition. John's vocals had madness and soul, while Chris laid down solos that felt like they were telling stories of their own. Gutter Ballet, in 1989, flipped the script. Metal with Broadway flair and haunting beauty. Then came Streets, a full-on rock opera about addiction and redemption. At a time when most bands were chasing radio, Savatage chased art, and they nailed it, but their story turned tragic. Chris Oliva was killed by a drunk driver in '93. The metal world lost a genius. Yet the band endured, evolving into Trans-Siberian Orchestra with producer Paul O'Neill. From sweaty clubs to sold-out arenas, Savatage proved metal could be epic, emotional, and unforgettable. More metal coming your way. Like and subscribe to be the first to know. One of the rare all-female forces in the new wave of British heavy metal is the band Rock Goddess. Formed in London by teenage sisters Jodie and Julie Turner, they hit hard right out of the gate. Their 1983 debut album delivered punchy, riff-driven tracks like My Angel, and heavy metal rock and roll. Both showcasing raw energy and strong songwriting. They toured with Def Leppard, Iron Maiden, and Y&T, earning their place on stage. Not that they thought through gimmicks, but sheer power. Still, media often reduced them to a girl band angle, missing the point entirely. Internal tensions and record label struggles slowed them down by the mid-'80s. But their music holds up, unpolished, loud, and honest. Rock Goddess never played the victim, they just plugged in and went for it. You know, Omen didn't just play metal, they waged war with it. Born in Los Angeles in 1983, they weren't chasing trends, they were carving runes and steel. Their debut album, Battle Cry, in 1984 hit like a catapult, unleashing anthem after anthem, and J.D. Kimball's voice, it was pure thunder. Powerful, haunted, unforgettable. He didn't sing lyrics, he battled them. Tracks like Death Rider and The Axeman sounded like ancient war chants blasted through martial stacks. Omen brought mythology to life with galloping riffs, fearless storytelling, and a raw, unpolished edge that made them feel dangerous. They didn't play for radio, they played for warriors. But timing can be cruel. The spotlight shifted, the thrash wave took over, and Omen remained underground, gathering a cult following that grew quietly, fiercely loyal. When Kimball passed away in 2003, it wasn't just a loss, it was heartbreak. Today, at European festivals like Keep It True, you'll still hear Omen's name chanted like a battle cry, and rightly so. We're talking about the UK version here. Formed in London in 1981. They came in near the end of the new wave of British heavy metal, but what they lacked in timing, they made up for with grit. Their 1984 debut, The Warrior, delivered fast, riff-heavy tracks like Run With The Pack, and Love or Leave Me. It wasn't polished, but it hit hard. Chariot was the only band signed to Shades Records, linked to the iconic Soho record shop, where metalheads hunted for imports and demos. They played the Reading Festival in 1987, but never cracked the big time. The Now or Never balanced big hooks with tough guitars. Striking a perfect middle ground between radio-friendly and arena-ready. Axe toured with Motley Crue, Judas Priest, and Ozzy, yet never reached the heights they deserved. A tragic 1984 car accident claimed the life of guitarist Michael Osborne and seriously injured bassist Mike Turpin, halting the band's momentum. Axe carried on with different lineups, but their early records remain a bittersweet reminder of a band that could have gone much further. Forgotten, maybe. Gone, never.